Hey, deserving listeners, 90 Day Fiancé. Let's watch.
It's like someone really close died so fast because they got sick. It's just, we cannot even understand, you know?
Yeah, it's surreal. Honestly, I don't think he'd want you to be sad. I have good memories of him.
Okay, first off, we've seen a fair amount of people, family members on this show die. I mean, I guess if we have a lot of cast members that are being filmed over a long period of time, then it's going to happen. But, I think one of Corey's parents, maybe his dad died. There were others, but it's tragic. For Guillermo, his brother, I think his older brother, died from renal failure. There was talk about how he wasn't doing well, and Guillermo was really crying about not being able to go back to see him, and he felt powerless, but his brother seemed to be doing okay. And then, boom, that night he dies, and so this is the next morning. And yeah, it's rough. You can hear it in his voice, and for Kara as well, she cares and I think knows the brother at least to some extent, and so she's really sad too. Obviously his pain is deeper, and you can hear it in his voice that he's in shock. He's just like, it's weird, and it is weird. I'm sure many of you have been through similar experiences, and I mean, it hits us. People say that there are different stages to grief, which is not empirically found. We don't have phases of grief. There are common experiences of grief, but not stages or even a set number of experiences, the way the 5 stages of grief were worked out. By the way, the author, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, in the 60s or 70s of the book On Death and Dying, in which she was a psychiatrist, I believe, in a hospital, or some sort of person who worked at a hospital, some sort of medical provider. And she worked a lot with people who were terminally ill, people who were known to soon die, and they were in the hospital. And she observed over time that these individuals would go through what she found to be phases of grief. So what she found was that the individuals, as they were told that they had 3 months to live, that they would go through these stages. They would be in shock, and then denial, and anger, and in there somewhere is bargaining, and then acceptance. And so they would say, what? And then there'd be denial, like, no, that's not happening. I needed a second opinion, that kind of thing. And then there would be anger, like the doctors did me wrong, or that job I had exposed me to too many chemicals, or I'm mad at myself because I didn't follow the doctor's orders or something. And then there'd be bargaining somewhere in there where the individual would be bargaining with God, like, please God, give me another 5 years and I'll promise that I'll devote everything to you, God. Or please, doctors, fix me and I'll pay you all the money. There's this pleading and bargaining phase. And then at the end, there was acceptance. Not every patient actually got to that point, but according to Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, the individuals would at some point accept their fate, and there was a contentment that she found. And there's other descriptors. And she describes in her book all the different people that she works with and the different observations she has. And then for whatever reason, that 5 stages of grief that was written by that one author somehow became generalized to not people as they were dying, but to people who were grieving someone else that died. And I think she encouraged it. In fact, I know that she did, because she became quite famous. I mean, there's a lot of authors, and she became one of the biggest, most popular. Her book On Death and Dying was required reading by almost all mental health clinicians from the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, into the 2000s. But when we actually started looking at people who go through grief, we found no stages. The 5 stages apply to some people randomly, but certainly not everyone, and it's a minority of people that it applies to. What we did find is that people vacillate between 2 phases where they will grieve and then they will rebuild. And there's no predicting how that will go. It's not like for one day you're rebuilding and another day you're grieving. It's dependent on the needs of the individual. And for some people, like I had a friend of mine who her sister died, and she was in the rebuilding phase for the first year. She didn't grieve at all, and she was deeply affected by the loss. But she didn't grieve at all. The rebuilding phase is trying to get back onto your feet, trying to persevere, trying to have some fun, trying to get your mind off of the loss. And that's all healthy. We find that people, when they're left to their own devices, they will vacillate between those two. And there's no predicting how long each phase will be. But if people are allowed to listen to their body and their heart and vacillate between those two positions, and people around them support them and don't shame them, and they haven't internalized, which we all have, grief shame and shame about this process, then we are free to do that, and we will naturally recover over time. Now, we never fully recover. Guillermo, will never fully recover from the loss of his brother. Grief lasts forever in that way, but the intensity of it will diminish and attenuate over time. Anniversaries, maybe his birthday or the holidays or the anniversary of his death, there will be a reemergence usually. But there's that. When he has a child, Guillermo, he is sad that he can't have his child meet his brother. That there'll be moments where there'll be an upwelling, but if he's allowed to go back and forth. But anyway, so we hear right now that a common experience is that shock where it just seems surreal. And I'll tell you from my own experience, when I've gone through significant losses, that I always go through that. I don't always know I'm going through it, but I always go through it. I'm just like, so they're not on this planet anymore. Like, it doesn't make any sense. Like, that can't be. It just doesn't compute in my brain. And I find myself thinking, well, we just got to go pick him up from the hospital, or I'll text them, because I feel lost, like they've left. And then I'm like, oh, well, their phone will get bars at some point and I can text them, because I'm just used to feeling when there's distance, there's an option of closeness. And when that's cut off, you're just like, wait, what? So they're just gone? They're just gone. It's like they're inaccessible. They're just erased, So for him, he's going through that. Kara is kind of too. And then Kara is trying to soothe him and says, and I don't know if they did a little funky edit right there, but because I can never know if it's accurate because they spliced in something when we didn't see her saying it physically. But at the very least, what they're editing it to look like is that she says, I don't think your brother would want you to be sad. And I don't recommend saying this sort of thing to people. She's doing, but that's the only thing I would comment on. All the rest that she's doing is actually really great. She was crying when he was sick, like genuinely crying with him. They're talking about it. She's there with him. She's not interfering in any way. She's listening to him. She's agreeing with him. She's like, yeah, it's surreal. It's totally surreal. But then she says, I don't think your brother would want you to be sad. And there's so many things wrong with that sentiment. It comes from a good place, though, is the thing. It comes from a place of, my fiance is sad and devastated, and I don't want him to be sad. And that's good. That means you have a heart. It means you have altruism. You don't want your partner to be sad. That's good. But you don't want to strong arm your partner to not be sad because you can make them more sad by trying to do that. So you just have to sit with your own anxiety and your own differentiation issue and say, I have an impulse to try to stop him from being sad, but that doesn't make any sense because that could really hurt him and make him more sad. So now he didn't seem to react out of hurt from that. And maybe it's just, there's a lot of things you say as you're going through a really rough time like that. So maybe that's why she said that.
Like, just fun.
Yeah.
And he never have a shirt on.
Big belly.
Yeah, big belly, no shirt. Chilling.
Yeah, brings a tear to my eye a little bit. And this is another thing about grief that we want to lean into when we feel it. And they seem to be in sync here. That when we lose people, or we lose a lot of things, we lose marriages, we lose relationships, we lose people, we lose pets, we lose a job, we lose an area when we move, we lose function of our body at times, We lose an ability, that kind of thing. We lose our hope in our government, and there's grief that we go through. And one of the aspects of grief, so remember there's rebuilding and grief, one of the aspects of grief we find empirically is people will make jokes. They will reminisce. They will remember. And what they're doing right now is they're remembering him and remembering something kind of funny about him, that he would never wear a shirt, and having a bit of a laugh, and that can help grief as well. So they seem she brought that up because they're in sync. They're both grieving together, and then he says, yeah, it's his belly.
What do you think? And he was actually really supportive. Like, having his support is like, everything is gonna be okay. Makes me wanna be the best in this relationship, to love you, to support you. And I will be that man that I always said.
So, using this as a jumping off point, we, through loss, often will gravitate naturally towards meaning and purpose and a narrative around why or what this means to us. And we sometimes call this post-traumatic growth or just meaning making after a loss. And we never want to force other people into that. We don't want to go, well, maybe this means that you're supposed you have to. And as a therapist, I will walk, alongside people as they explore this. And I will sometimes introduce it if I feel like they might need a little bit of a topic to think about. But usually people will, and it is a good sign that he's doing this already, that he finds that it is a way to honor him is to have a good marriage, because his older brother was really proud of him and supported their union. And so he can honor his memory. He can be good to his brother. He can love his brother and find meaning in that by dedicating himself to his marriage and trying to have a good life. And so it usually takes a long time for people to get there. It's possible that he already was adjusting and grieving already because the prospect of his brother dying was on the table because of his health condition. So maybe that's why he's already there. But I don't know. It's not uncommon to pretty quickly have these kinds of points of view, but it does mean resilience, and that idea is being introduced to him, because it makes it's not necessarily a silver lining, but when our lives have meaning, then we feel better about it. We feel better about our lives. We feel better about where we're headed. It gives it structure. There's purpose. And when we have a loss and we only see it as a negative thing, then it's demoralizing. Whereas if there's something that we can take away from it, something that can inspire us to persevere, and something we can do to honor them. That's why that's why we have funerals. That's why we have gravestones or ceremonies around the ashes. That's why people will have altars in their house or a Facebook page that's dedicated to that person that they visit every now and then. That's why we do that, because without that, it's demoralizing to think about just this cliff that things in our life just fall off of. Whereas if we have some way of remembering people, and while I'm on the topic, that we have a lot of stigma in our country that it's morbid by remembering the dead or by honoring the dead. Like other cultures around the world, they'll have an altar in the middle of the living room, front and center, that has, it's an altar to their ancestors, grandpa who died, maybe even a pet that died, and there will be daily incense and offerings. And to Americans, to mainstream Americans, that's morbid. It's like, so right in the middle of your living room, you have this like funeral or this cemetery, right? Like that's morbid, that's gross. And because us as Americans are phobic about death and the realization of that, and that hinders us as a culture in terms of healthy progression and healthy grieving. In fact, most Americans, as they go through grief, already have so much internalized shame about long-term grief that maybe a week in to their grief, maybe even just a few days, they will already be shaming themselves that they're not getting over it, that they're dwelling on it. So another element to that phobic attitude about death and about grief is that when people hold on to objects of the lost loved one, they'll internally shame themselves, or they'll be shamed from the outside. Like if a child died, for example, a 7-year-old child, and the parents kept the bedroom the same for 10 years, that would be not only seen as odd, but it would be seen as absolutely creepy by mainstream Americans. They'd see like, they haven't changed the room. It's like some sort of horror movie or something. And no. And it'd also be seen as the parents not letting go. But it might actually be part of them, quote unquote, letting go, or at least moving forward, that they still have a part of their son, that they can look in the room every now and then. And in fact, a lot of plot progressions in our movies involve the tearing down of those things. You know, that if you had a movie about someone like that, the climax would be the parents like packing up all the stuff and letting things go, right? And that could be true. I mean, some people do have a hard time letting go, but usually they have a time letting go because no one from the outside and from the inside allows them to grieve, allows them to honor, allows them to hold on to things. So yeah, anyway, so he's saying that he's already developing some meaning, which is a good sign for him.
And I know he wants me to be.
Yeah.
And that's it.
We'll do it. Love you.
No. Thank you.
So that was good too. So affection, and then he, thank you. I think meaning thanks for being there and listening to me and being a supportive partner. It's another important thing to think about. And again, particularly for mainstream Americans, we're so phobic that, I mean, I've heard people say like, well, my husband's grieving, I don't want to bother him. It's like, huh? Like, what? I don't know, like they're radioactive or something. Like, what do you mean you don't want to bother them? Like, now if your husband that's grieving says, leave me alone, then fine, leave him alone. But be with him, grieve with him. Aren't you sad too? Aren't you at least sad for him? And so she is there and active and, grieving with, and he, thanks for being there with me. It's one of those critical moments in a relationship, and I would argue more critical than one's wedding. When you go through an event like that, if any of you have ever had a partner or a friend that just seemed to pull away from you or just wasn't there or told you not to feel things, it can really be a defining moment in your relationship with someone where you're just like, oh, I get it. Like, we're not really friends. You're just like someone I hang out with. You don't really care about me. And then other people that are peripheral usually in your social life will really will really, be there for you. And you'll be like, oh, you're the real friend. Like, you understand, and you're intensely aware of what I'm going through, and you're open to me, and you're willing to get your hands dirty with the grief with me, whereas these other people, they're just avoiding me. So it's critical that if your partner or friend is going through something like that, you want to do what you can to, be compassionate for them. Now, and I've talked about this before, it's nuanced. There's a lot of rules in our weird society, American society, around grief. It's like, you're supposed to do this, but never do that. Forget about all that stuff. What is in your heart? Get to that center. Center yourself on what is in your heart. And I hope you find compassion and care and love. So find that, hold on to that, and then be motivated by that. So if that means you call them or go over to their house, or you bring over food, or you send them flowers with a long card, not just thoughts and prayers, but actual, compassion in the card. Does that mean you give them their space? Does it mean that you ask them if they need anything? Because a frequent thing that people will do will say, do you need anything? And if you've ever gone through a loss, you'll hear a lot of that from people. Let me know if you need anything. And it's like, do you really mean that? Or is that just something you say? Like, how are you doing? But you don't really care how I'm doing. Are you really saying that? Because I'm so confused and in the dumps, and demoralized right now that I don't even really know what I want. And I don't, you're offering, but I don't feel like the door is really that open to me asking, and I feel shy, so I'll just avoid everyone. So sometimes so it's a matter of intuiting and reading the room and figuring out what the griever needs. Like you might say, hey, let me know if you need anything. And your grieving friend's like, oh, thanks. And you might say, no, I really mean it. I don't mean it like the way other people might say. I really mean it. Like, I want to be there for you because you're a good friend of mine. And I know how hard this is. And I really want to be there for you because I'm a loyal friend. So are you sure you don't need anything? Or I'm going to bring over food tomorrow. Is that okay? Or is that invasive? Because I don't want you to worry about that. So especially if they have kids, so it's like, is it okay if I bring over food tomorrow? How does that feel? I want to do that. Will you let me do that? Is that okay? And the person's like, well, okay, yeah, that would be helpful. Or if your friend's like, no, I kind of just want to be alone. Then, okay, yeah. So love, compassion, care, honesty, authenticity, or even you could just say something like, I know you're going through something really rough right now, and I want to help, and I want to be there for you emotionally and practically, but I don't know what to say. And I'm worried I'm going to say something stupid, but just know that I care deeply and I want to be there for you. But it goes a long way. So, don't worry about the rules, all the internet stuff. Like, let me Google it. Okay, so I Googled and I clicked on one of the first things that I found, and this page is titled 21 Comforting Texts You Can Send Your Grieving Friend. And, it's fine, but it's like texting. I don't know. So number 1 is, I'm sorry to hear the news of your brother's passing. Please accept my deepest regrets for your loss. Again, fine, but if I lost my brother and I heard this, well, I don't know. If I got this text, I'd be touched to some extent, but it certainly wouldn't. If you were close to me as a friend, which I'm guessing it wouldn't be true if you're just texting, but if you were close to me, if like my wife sent me that text or something, I'd be like, what? Another one, I was deeply saddened to hear of your mom's passing. She was such a great inspiration to me. Please let me know how I can help you during this difficult time. So again, not terrible. And people say like, that's terrible. It's not bad, but if that's all you do and you're close to that person, the recipient will likely either be just neutral or kind of hurt by that. But anyway, I Googled another one, and it says like what not to say to someone. And this one, I won't give you the website because I don't want to call them out, but number 1, they're in a better place. Yeah, you don't want to say that unless they said it, but you don't want to introduce that because that's heavy-handed. You're sad for your friend or family member, and you're trying to get them not to be sad anymore. You're just like, well, they're in a better place, so don't be sad. And it's like, well, thanks for that. And then number 2 is, it was God's will. That's similar to number 1. Number 3 is, I'll bring dinner tomorrow. Okay, so I don't know. Let's see. Bringing food and offering care for loved ones is actually extremely helpful. It's really most helpful, however, when you're asking what they need and when specifically. Yeah, absolutely. So you don't just want to, like I said, you want to read the room, but you want to potentially start to suggest things. Like I was saying, you don't want to say, let me know if you need anything. You might want to say, would it help if I brought dinner tomorrow? Or would that not? Or would it help if I watched your kids for a day? Or, like you want to really offer and say, how about tomorrow? Would you like me to come over? Or what do you want? Like, you don't want to just say, let me know if you need anything, expecting them. But I wouldn't say that it's wrong to say, I'll bring dinner tomorrow, because it might be helpful to say that, but it depends on the situation. Number 4, let me know if I can help. Yeah, I've already been over that one. Number 5, let's talk about something happy. Yeah, that's ridiculous. Yeah, okay, well, not terrible. Not as bad as I thought it was going to be, honestly. All right, well, that does it for that episode. Everyone out there, please take care of yourself because you deserve it. You really, really do.